Welcome back to Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. My name is Victoria Bert, and I'm the producer of the show. And we're going to continue our conversation on protest politics and racism and police brutality. My next guest, Alvin Bragg, was the first chief of a special unit that investigated police killings here in New York for the AG's office. You spent most of your life fighting for police accountability, and I think that it's fair to say that the relationship between Black Americans and the police is sort of a barometer for race relations in this country. And I just want to sort of really touch base with you and get your thoughts on what's been happening in the last few weeks. And really, it goes back many, many, many years and decades and hundreds of years, actually. Tell me what you think is the core of the problem right now.
It's embedded in the history of the country, and it's sort of, I view it as race and power intertwined. Supreme Court decision in Dred Scott, where our highest court in the land said that a Black man was very gender specific, doesn't have any rights that a white man is bound to respect. Through Emmett Till, which was wasn't in the first instance police action, but was a private mob, which ties us into what happened in Central Park. It doesn't have to be the police directly; it could be someone kind of, a private actor enlisting the police or doing police-like activities. But I say race and power because, we have seen over the years, and I've been involved in cases over the years, with Black police officers too. And so it's deeply embedded, right? This perception that the use of force to control, Black bodies and the way it is used by the power structure. And I just wanted to note that, sometimes that involves, Black police officers too doing it.
So I want to just, you mentioned the Central Park incident here that happened in Manhattan here in New York. And there's definitely a connection, right, between the George Floyd murder and the phone call by Amy Cooper on the Black man, Christian Cooper, no relation, obviously, when she called the police and said that her life was being threatened. Can you draw that correlation for me?
Sure. She knew exactly what she was doing, right? I don't know which award it is, whether it's an Oscar or an Emmy, but I mean, the sort of the fake weepiness, the saying, this is an African-American man threatening me. By the way, I love the use of African-American by the threats. Like, I'm going to use this politically correct term while I'm in the middle of, insulting all Black people. But yeah, they're intertwined, and we've seen it time and time again. Again, I think, Emmett Till is a good example with sort of the enlisting a private, mob to come to the quote rescue of a white woman. And so it's intertwined that she knew, the type of police response that would come to sort of a threatening African-American man call. We could very well be talking about a very different outcome had they come in response to that call. So I think they're really connected. And some people say, well, Christian Cooper's alive. I actually listed him in an article I wrote the other day with the names of, Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. And someone said, well, he's still alive. Why'd you list him? Because it's all connected, and he's, by force of circumstance, he's alive. But the same underlying conduct is leading to these outcomes. And we need to talk about them in an integrated way and not in this sort of episodic, one to another. It's this connective tissue, and we need to diagnose it as a whole.
I mean, essentially, that phone call was a threat.
No doubt about it. And it's a threat, and it's dangerous. I've called on the district attorney to bring charges because it's a threat, it's dangerous, and it's also unlawful. And there's so many more examples, right? The Black women who were playing golf, quote, too slowly. The young a Black girl who was selling water, 8 years old, I believe, without a permit, and a white woman called the police on her. We've got to, we have to, the government has a responsibility, not just those responding on Twitter. We can sort of, the government has a responsibility to use government power to address these ills.
You wrote a really interesting article in the Medium, I believe, about called Black People at Risk Every Moment of the Day. What were some of your thoughts that you wanted to bring forward when you wrote that article?
First and foremost, it was cathartic for me. I mean, I've been spending a lot of time talking to my two children, 10 years old and 14-year-old. We need to be thinking about next steps so that they're not having the same conversations with their kids, and to connect all of the various incidents so that we're not talking about them separately. We need to protest, we need to sue, we need to prosecute. We're not going to have someone who works day in, day out with the police, investigate a murder by a police officer. We're not going to do it. We need to sort of have that in the law. We've got an executive order in New York, but it needs to be law. Legislature, I was encouraged. Looks like they're going to move on New York Civil Rights Law 50A, which is a law which provides undue protection to police officers' personnel records. Officers have histories, and if we can know these histories and flag them of prior discipline and complaints, we might be able to prevent incidents. We shouldn't be seeing our law enforcement leaders just in this reactive state. Should be proactive, being proactive, getting independence, having transparency. Gone should be the days when we have one of these investigations and it says, "Oh, well, grand jury decided, can't tell you anything more."
I'm seeing history repeat itself. I started working in journalism in television in 90. So this is sort of a very full circle moment where I'm seeing this happen, again to, Rodney King didn't die and George Floyd did at the hands of the police. What's changed?
I think that's why you see the anger. That's why I've spent much of the last week angry. I mean, a couple of years before Rodney King, I had my first time I was stopped at gunpoint. And so that was sort of started my, personal awareness that Black people are at risk every moment of every day. Then, in college during Rodney King, helping to lead, student protests. And then I've spent much of the last 20 years, really trying to push this boulder up a hill, and it feels like it's at the bottom of the hill, right? That progress, while we'd like to think there was some, really, if we're still seeing what we saw in Minnesota, or really even in Central Park, it is hard to be encouraged. And so that I've spent the last week, feeling that way. And I think so many others have. And it really wasn't until, Sunday, sort of, my day of worship with the children of my church, where I sort of was like, no, we got to pick ourselves back up. And we got to continue to fight in all the ways we have. We have to continue to protest, and have that sort of anger there. But some of the things we talked about earlier too, right? I mean, if we're not filling out the census, we're going to lose a big 10-year opportunity, right? If we're not voting out, this wild man that's in the White House, who, I mean, we're not going to go into that, the ways. But if we're not doing that, we'll be further behind. We're not even about any progress. I mean, you think about it now. We have a president who has said, told officers, rough them up a little bit when you arrest them.
He said, if there's looting, there's shooting.
Even long before this, he made this sort of rough it up comment 2 or 3 years ago, right? And then you had Charlottesville, embracing white nationalism. It's all connected. We need new leadership. I mean, I think a reason why this feels even worse. I mean, the video is terrible. The conduct is terrible. And I think it's one of the worst. I've seen other ones, the shooting in the back in South Carolina and the planting of the taser. All these videos are gruesome and hard to watch. But it feels like this is even worse because of the voids of leadership.
I don't know. It's a difficult conversation to have because there's so many prongs to the problem. There's so many issues that are at stake, and it's so deep that I don't know how any change can be made without going to the primal wound.
Discussing the primal wound, you have to have the diagnosis right, in order to have the right cure. So, calling it what it is, this sort of connective tissue of racism and power that runs throughout the history of our country, I think we must do that. That's got to be the starting point. But then some of the specific things I talked about earlier really would be fundamental shifts, right? Throughout the history of our country, the people who are doing this are people who are kind of working hand in hand, and who, prosecuting these cases are hand in hand. So that's, I think, a fundamental shift. I think reporting out, like we did at the Attorney General's office, and telling everyone the findings is something, we got to put as much out in the public so people can see. The proliferation of video, I think, has helped with public awareness, right? Like I knew and you knew. I've known since the first gun stop stop on my corner, in 1980s Harlem. I didn't need a video. but I think others sadly did.
Isn't New York City one of the most secretive as far as the police, their background and their things that they've done in their career? Is that correct?
That is correct. The 50A, which I'm hoping and sort of have one, the word is it may be repealed within a matter of a week. The governor and the mayor both have now gone on record saying they support that repeal, which has not been always the case that they've supported it. And so I think something like that would be a big change here. If used, it's got to be used, would allow private actors to get that information, but we also need government systems to sort of support that and complement those private efforts to say, okay, you have this, substantiated claim of, you've lied before. Well, we can't use you. We can't have an officer who's lied, a prosecuted an FBI agent for lying in connection with his job. Can't do the job if you're going to lie. This goes back to Cooper, right? Like, can't have a case, based on a lie. So, I think some of these things, while they're all incremental, right? Like, none of them is the panacea. They're all still important, right? So we repeal 50A, we get the special prosecutor law, we continue to sort of protest and talk about this all comes from this kind of race power interaction. We have to keep doing all of it, right? Every single piece of it, and then hopefully it leads to real change. We got to do it all.
Alvin Bragg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.